I was thrown out of my own sister's wedding for wearing the wrong dress. Security dragged me past hundreds of guests, but when the billionaire groom's father saw me, everything changed. He whispered one word that made my sister's face go white. "Madam." Here's what happened next. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, this story will hit close to home. Stay until the end because the twist will leave you speechless. And if this resonates with you, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. My name is Frances, and I'm 39 years old. 5 years ago, I thought I had found my happily ever after when I married Peter, a successful businessman with 2 children from his previous marriage. Amy was 17 then, and Jake was 15. Their mother had passed away from cancer 3 years before Peter and I met, and I genuinely believed I could help heal their broken family. I was so naive back then, thinking that love and patience could fix everything. Peter was different from any man I'd ever known. He wasn't flashy with his wealth, didn't try to impress me with expensive gifts or fancy restaurants. What drew me to him was his kindness, his dedication to his children, and the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their position in life. When he proposed, it wasn't with some grand gesture. We were sitting in his kitchen on a Sunday morning, watching Amy and Jake argue over the last piece of bacon, and he just looked at me and said, "I want you to be part of this chaos forever." That's when I knew I was home, but Peter's children never saw it that way. From the moment I moved into their house, Amy and Jake made it clear that I was an intruder. They whispered when I walked into rooms, made snide comments about my clothes, my cooking, even the way I arranged flowers. Amy, especially, had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. "Oh, Frances, that dress is so interesting. I could never be brave enough to wear something like that." Jake was more direct in his hostility, often ignoring me completely or rolling his eyes whenever I tried to join family conversations. The worst part was that they convinced themselves I was a gold digger. They'd grown up comfortable, never wanting for anything, and they couldn't understand why someone would want to be with their father for any reason other than money. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had been financially independent long before I met Peter. In fact, I was probably wealthier than he was, but I kept that information private. Money had never been important to me in the way they thought it was. When Peter died in that car accident 2 years ago, my world shattered. But Amy and Jake's reaction was even worse than their grief. It was suspicion. They immediately assumed I would try to take everything that belonged to them. They hired lawyers, demanded to see the will, and made it clear that they believed I had somehow manipulated their father into leaving me anything. The truth was, Peter had been incredibly fair. He left the house to his children, along with most of his business assets. I inherited some savings and a few sentimental items, nothing that would make me rich by any stretch. But they still saw me as a threat. My sister Caroline had always been complicated, but after Peter's death, she sided completely with Amy and Jake. She'd call me and say things like, "Frances, I think you should really consider what's best for those children. They've been through so much." She never asked how I was doing, never acknowledged that I had lost my husband too. In her mind, I was the outsider who had disrupted the natural order of things. So when Caroline announced her engagement to Jonathan, a tech billionaire she'd met through her marketing job, I wasn't surprised that I felt like an afterthought in the wedding planning. The invitation came just 3 weeks before the ceremony. Not because she forgot, but because Amy had convinced her that maybe it would be better if I didn't come at all. "She'll just make everything about herself," Amy had told Caroline over the phone. I heard this because Jake had put the call on speaker, thinking I wasn't home. "You know how she is. She can't stand not being the center of attention." The irony was crushing. I had spent 2 years trying to make myself invisible, trying not to rock the boat, trying to grieve my husband quietly while his children painted me as some sort of manipulative villain. And now I was being accused of attention-seeking for simply existing. But I decided I would go to Caroline's wedding anyway. She was my sister, and despite everything, I loved her. I chose a beautiful burgundy dress, elegant, sophisticated, but not flashy. I thought it was perfect for a late afternoon ceremony. I was wrong. Caroline called me the night before the wedding, her voice tight with anxiety. Francis, Amy mentioned you're wearing burgundy tomorrow. Don't you think that's a bit much? I mean, it's my day and I just want everything to be perfect. I could hear Amy coaching her in the background, whispering suggestions. Caroline, it's just a dress. It's not even close to white or ivory. I think you're worrying about nothing. It's not nothing, Francis. Amy says burgundy is very attention-grabbing, and with your coloring, you'll stand out too much in the photos. Couldn't you just wear something more subdued? That's when I realized this wasn't about the dress at all. This was about Amy and Jake's campaign to make me feel unwelcome everywhere I went. They had turned my own sister against me, convinced her that my very presence was somehow threatening. I hung up the phone and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired, defeated. When had I become someone who apologized for taking up space? When had I started believing that I didn't deserve to be treated with basic respect? The morning of the wedding, I put on that burgundy dress and looked at myself again. This time, I saw someone different. I saw a woman who had built a successful career, who had anonymously helped countless people, who had loved deeply and lost gracefully. I saw someone who deserved better than the treatment I'd been accepting. The wedding venue was stunning, a historic mansion with manicured gardens and crystal chandeliers. Jonathan had spared no expense, and everything looked like something out of a fairy tale. I arrived fashionably on time, not early enough to get roped into last-minute family duties, but not late enough to make an entrance. The whispers started immediately. I could see Amy moving through the crowd of guests like a social media influencer working a room. She'd approach groups of people, lean in conspiratorially, and then glance in my direction. I caught fragments of conversations as I walked past. Gold digger, poor Peter, shameless. Jake was working the room too, playing the role of the grieving son whose inheritance was threatened by his wicked stepmother. He had always been charming when it suited his purposes, and today it definitely suited his purposes. I watched him talking to our elderly relatives, shaking his head sadly, accepting their sympathetic pats on the arm. Caroline was in full bride mode, glowing and gorgeous, but I noticed how she avoided making eye contact with me. When I tried to approach her during the cocktail hour to offer my congratulations, she was suddenly swept away by her wedding planner for some urgent matter that couldn't wait. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Jonathan seemed genuinely smitten with Caroline, and for a moment I felt hopeful that maybe love could win after all. But then Caroline's maid of honor gave her speech during the reception, and I realized the campaign against me was more organized than I had imagined. Caroline has always been so generous, the maid of honor said, always willing to help family members who might take advantage of her kind heart, but she's learned to set boundaries with people who don't have her best interests in mind. The woman's eyes found mine across the room as she said this, and several guests turned to look at me. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but I maintained my composure. I had done nothing wrong. I had loved my husband, had tried to be a good stepmother, and had grieved his loss with dignity. I would not be ashamed of that. But Amy wasn't finished. During the dinner service, she stood up with a microphone, ostensibly to give a toast to her Aunt Caroline. Instead, she launched into a speech about the importance of family loyalty and how some people try to insert themselves into situations where they don't belong. Family isn't just about blood, Amy said, her voice carrying across the silent room. It's about loyalty, about putting the people you love first, about not taking advantage of tragedy for personal gain. She paused, letting her words sink in. Some people here know what I'm talking about. The room was completely silent now. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, could hear the whispers starting again. This was it. This was the public humiliation they had been planning. They wanted to destroy me in front of everyone, wanted to make sure I knew exactly how unwelcome I was. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice steady when I spoke. Amy, if you have something to say to me, perhaps we should discuss it privately. Actually, I think everyone should hear this, Amy replied, her confidence growing. I think everyone should know what kind of person you really are." That's when Jake joined her, pulling out what looked like official documents. "We have proof," he announced dramatically. "Proof that Frances had massive debts before she married our father. Proof that she targeted him specifically because of his wealth." The papers he was waving around looked convincing from a distance. Official letterheads, legal-looking fonts. But I knew they had to be fabricated because I had never had any significant debts. If anything, I had been the one helping Peter with some of his business investments, though I had never told his children that. Caroline was standing now too, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. But her anger wasn't directed at her new stepchildren. It was directed at me. "Frances, I think you need to leave. This is my wedding day, and I won't have you disrupting it any further." "I haven't disrupted anything," I said calmly. "I've been sitting quietly, trying to celebrate your marriage." "Your very presence is disruptive," Caroline snapped. "Amy and Jake have told me everything. How you manipulated their father, how you're trying to steal their inheritance, how you've been lying to all of us about who you really are." The room was buzzing now, guests openly staring and whispering. Some were recording on their phones. I realized that this humiliation was going to live forever on social media, shared and reshared until everyone in our social circle had seen it. "Security!" Caroline called out, her voice breaking slightly. "Please escort this woman out. She's not welcome here." Two large men in suits appeared as if from nowhere. They approached me with professional courtesy but firm intent. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." I looked around the room one more time, hoping to see at least one friendly face, one person who might speak up for me, but everyone was either looking away or staring with fascination at the drama unfolding. Even my own relatives had been convinced by Amy and Jake's performance. As the security guards gently but firmly took my arms to escort me out, I felt something break inside me. Not my spirit, that was stronger than they realized, but my last connection to this family that had never really accepted me. I was finally seeing clearly just how far Amy and Jake's hatred had spread, how thoroughly they had poisoned everyone against me. We were halfway to the exit when everything changed. A voice cut through the murmur of the crowd, authoritative and sharp. "Stop! Release her immediately." The security guards froze, their training clearly telling them to obey whoever was speaking with such command. I looked up to see a distinguished man in his 60s approaching us, his face a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like reverence. This had to be Jonathan's father, William. I had seen him earlier during the ceremony, sitting in the front row. But we hadn't been introduced. He was tall and elegant, with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested he was used to being the most important person in any room. But the way he was looking at me wasn't what I expected. There was recognition in his eyes and respect, and something that looked almost like gratitude. "Madam," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent room, "is it really you?" I stared at him, confused. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" William's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire appearance. "We've never met face to face, but I know exactly who you are. You're the angel investor. You're the woman who saved my company 10 years ago." The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone else." "No confusion at all," William said, his voice growing stronger. 10 years ago, when my tech company was about to go under, when I was going to lose everything and 10,000 employees were going to lose their jobs, someone made an anonymous investment of $50 million. No strings attached, no demands for board seats or profit sharing, just a simple note that said, "Some dreams are worth saving." That someone was you, Frances Peterson. I felt the blood drain from my face. The Peterson Foundation had been my maiden name investment fund, something I had kept completely private even after marrying Peter. I had helped dozens of companies over the years, always anonymously, always with the simple goal of preserving jobs and supporting innovation. "How did you?" I started to ask. "I've been searching for my mysterious benefactor for 10 years, William explained. "I hired the best private investigators, followed every paper trail I could find." It took me 8 years to trace the investment back to the Peterson Foundation and another 2 years to discover that Frances Peterson had become Frances Mitchell. When Jonathan told me he was marrying Caroline Mitchell and that she had a sister named Frances, I wondered, but I never imagined I would meet you like this. Amy's face had gone completely white. Jake was staring at the fake documents in his hands as if they had suddenly caught fire. Caroline looked like she might faint. "That's impossible," Amy whispered. "She was broke when she married our father. She needed his money." William turned to look at Amy with the kind of cold assessment that had probably terrified competitors in boardrooms around the world. "Young lady, the woman you've been slandering is worth approximately $200 million. She was wealthy long before she met your father, and she's been quietly managing and growing her fortune ever since. The Peterson Foundation has invested in over 40 companies, saved countless jobs, and funded scholarship programs that have put thousands of students through college." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see guests frantically Googling Peterson Foundation on their phones, their faces changing as they found articles about anonymous charitable donations and business investments. "Furthermore," William continued, "I happen to know that Frances helped your father with several of his business decisions in the last years of his life. That real estate investment that performed so well, that was her recommendation. The tech stocks that tripled in value? Her suggestion. You've been living quite comfortably off the results of her financial advice while calling her a gold digger." Jake dropped the fake documents, and they scattered across the floor like the lies they were. Amy was crying now, but not tears of sadness, tears of humiliation and anger at being exposed. Caroline was standing frozen, her perfect wedding day crumbling around her as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. "Frances, I didn't know—" "No," I said quietly, finding my voice again. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't know because you chose to believe the worst about me without ever giving me a chance to defend myself. You didn't know because it was easier to side with them than to think for yourself." William was still looking at me with that expression of gratitude and respect. "Madam, I owe you everything. My company not only survived because of your investment, but it thrived. We went public 3 years ago, and we're now one of the largest employers in the tech sector. Thousands of families have good lives because of what you did." I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief. After 2 years of being made to feel small, worthless, like some sort of parasite, someone finally saw me for who I really was. "I never wanted credit," I said softly. "That's not why I do it." "I know," William replied, "and that's exactly why I've been so desperate to find you. The world needs more people like you, Frances, people who help others without expecting anything in return, who see potential where others see only problems." The crowd was murmuring now, a completely different energy than before. People were looking at me with curiosity and respect instead of suspicion and judgment. The wedding photographer, who had been capturing my humiliation moments before, was now snapping pictures of William and me with obvious interest. Jonathan had appeared at his father's side, looking mortified. "Dad, I had no idea." "Caroline, why didn't you tell me your sister was—" "Because she didn't know either," I said, looking directly at Caroline. "Because she never asked about my life before Peter. She just assumed the worst and went with it." Amy made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that she married our father for his money." William turned to her with barely concealed disgust. "Your stepmother was already significantly wealthier than your father when they married. If anyone was a gold digger in that relationship, it certainly wasn't her." The truth of that statement hit Amy and Jake like a physical blow. All their theories, all their accusations, all their careful character assassination, it was all based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I had brought to their father's life. I looked around the room one more time, seeing the faces of people who had been ready to condemn me just minutes before. Some looked ashamed now, others fascinated, a few genuinely apologetic. But I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. William's recognition hadn't just vindicated me, it had reminded me of who I really was. "Caroline," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I hope you have a wonderful marriage. Jonathan seems like a good man, and you deserve happiness. But I won't be part of your life going forward, not because I'm angry, I'm not angry anymore, but because I deserve better than this." I turned to Amy and Jake, who were standing together like two children caught in an enormous lie. "I loved your father deeply, and I tried to love both of you. I'm sorry that wasn't enough for you, but I won't apologize for existing anymore." William stepped forward and offered me his arm. "Francis, would you do me the honor of letting me escort you out of here? I'd very much like to continue our conversation somewhere more private." As we walked toward the exit together, I heard Caroline calling my name, her voice desperate now. But I didn't look back. I had spent 2 years looking back, trying to fix relationships that had been broken from the start, trying to earn love from people who had decided I wasn't worth it. William led me to his car, a sleek black sedan with a driver waiting. "I know this probably isn't how you wanted to spend your evening, but would you consider having dinner with me? I have 10 years' worth of gratitude to express, and I suspect you have some stories to tell." I settled into the luxurious leather seat and looked back at the mansion where Caroline's wedding reception was undoubtedly continuing, probably with plenty of gossip about the dramatic turn of events. "You know what, William? I'd like that very much." As we drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of being truly seen and valued for who I really was. Amy and Jake had spent so much energy trying to diminish me, to make me feel small and unwelcome, that they had never stopped to consider what they might be losing in the process. The truth was, I had been supporting them more than they realized. The comfortable lifestyle they had maintained after Peter's death? That was partly due to investments I had recommended. The college funds that had paid for their educations, enhanced by financial strategies I had suggested to their father. They had been benefiting from my presence in their lives while simultaneously working to destroy me. But that was over now. William was right. I deserved better than people who would judge me without knowing me, who would believe the worst without seeking the truth. I had spent too long trying to earn acceptance from people who had never intended to give it. That evening, over dinner at an elegant restaurant downtown, William and I talked for hours. He told me about his company's journey from near bankruptcy to industry leadership, about the employees who had kept their jobs because of my investment, about the innovations that had emerged from that period of stability. I told him about the Peterson Foundation, about the quiet satisfaction of helping dreams survive and grow, about the loneliness of doing good work that no one could know about. "Why do you keep it anonymous?" he asked as we shared dessert. I thought about that for a moment. Because the moment people know you have money, they start treating you differently. They either want something from you, or they assume you want something from them. The work becomes about the recognition instead of the impact. William nodded thoughtfully. "But doesn't it get lonely? Never being able to share your successes?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But tonight, for the first time in years, I don't feel lonely at all." 3 days later, Caroline called me. She was back from her honeymoon, and her voice was small and uncertain. "Francis, could we talk, please?" "What would you like to talk about, Caroline?" "I want to apologize, I want to explain, I want to fix this somehow." I was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window of my home office at the garden Peter and I had planted together. "Caroline, I appreciate that you want to apologize, but I need you to understand something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a case of poor communication. You chose to believe Amy and Jake's version of who I was without ever asking for mine. You chose to humiliate me publicly rather than having a private conversation. Those were choices, not mistakes. I know. I was wrong. Completely wrong. Can't we start over?" "Some things can't be started over, Caroline. They can only be ended with grace." Amy and Jake tried to reach out too, through text messages and voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as they realized the full implications of what had happened. The family members who had witnessed their accusations were asking uncomfortable questions. Their friends were looking at them differently. The inheritance they had been so worried about protecting? They were starting to understand that they might have been protecting it from the very person who had helped create it. But I was done being their scapegoat, done being the villain in their story so they could feel better about their own choices. I blocked their numbers and focused on building the life I actually wanted. William and I became genuine friends. He introduced me to other business leaders who shared my philosophy of giving back, and for the first time, I found a community of people who understood the responsibility that comes with wealth. I started speaking at conferences about anonymous philanthropy, about the joy of impact without recognition. 6 months after Caroline's wedding, I received an unexpected visitor. Amy showed up at my door on a Saturday morning, looking exhausted and much older than her 24 years. "I need to talk to you," she said without preamble. I almost closed the door, but something in her face made me step back and let her in. She sat on my couch and looked around at the home she had lived in for 3 years, the home she had always seen as temporary, as something that belonged to her father instead of to the woman who had made it warm and welcoming. "I've been seeing a therapist," Amy said finally, "about Dad's death, about everything that happened after." She helped me understand some things. I waited, not making it easy for her. I was so angry when Dad died. Not just sad, angry. Angry that he left us, angry that we had to figure out how to live without him, angry that you were there and he wasn't. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "It was easier to be angry at you than to be angry at him." "And Jake?" "Jake followed my lead. He always has. I was older, I was angrier, and I convinced him that you were the problem." Amy wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture that reminded me suddenly of the teenager she had been when I first moved in. "I know now that Dad loved you, really loved you, and I know that you loved him too." I sat down across from her, maintaining some distance but no longer defensive. "Why are you telling me this, Amy?" "Because I need you to know that I understand what we did to you. I understand that we didn't just treat you badly, we tried to destroy you. We made you feel unwelcome in your own family. We turned people against you. We made you doubt yourself." She was crying now, ugly tears that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. "And I need you to know that I know it was wrong. Not just mistaken, wrong." I felt something shift in my chest, not quite forgiveness but not anger either. "What do you want from me, Amy?" "Nothing," she said, and I could tell she meant it. "I don't want you to forgive me or forget what happened or pretend we can be family again. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm sorry for it." We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Amy stood up to leave. At the door, she turned back to me one more time. "For what it's worth, I think Dad would be proud of how you handled everything. You were more graceful than we deserved." After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about grace and forgiveness, about the difference between understanding someone and excusing their behavior. Amy's apology didn't undo the damage she had caused, didn't erase the humiliation or the months of questioning my own worth. But it did something else. It closed a chapter. That evening I called William. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," I said, "about going public with some of the Peterson Foundation's work." "Oh?" "I'm ready to step out of the shadows a little bit. Not completely. I still believe in anonymous giving, but maybe it's time for people to know that kindness and success can coexist, that wealth can be a tool for good rather than just accumulation." William's laugh was warm and genuine. "Francis, I think the world is ready for someone like you to be visible, someone who proves that the best people often work quietly, without fanfare, making things better simply because they can. Sometimes the people who dismiss us have no idea who we really are or what we've accomplished." Francis learned that respect isn't about blood relations, it's about character. Her stepchildren spent years trying to destroy her, not knowing she was the reason for their comfortable life. Truth always comes out eventually. If this story taught you something about standing up for yourself, smash that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories. What would you have done in Francis's situation? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.